Welcome back to the SampanViking on China channel. Today I'm going to ask the question, are the unfolding events in Kazakhstan a colour revolution? It's certainly very easy to look at it and to think in those terms, to reach that conclusion. There are a lot of elements there that would make Kazakhstan a very happy target for the West to perform a colour revolution. And there are a number of ingredients that we see that do appear similar to those that you would see in a colour revolution. Let's just have a quick look at Kazakhstan itself as a country. It is a massive country. It sits to the south of Russia. It stretches from the Caspian Sea in the west, and as a country, it has the largest shoreline on the Caspian Sea of any country. Its borders, its furthermost western border starts literally just a few miles, about 100 miles east of the Volga Valley, Volgograd, and stretches all the way across until it meets the Chinese border of Xinjiang very nearly. I mean, there's only about 50 miles, I think, between the eastern end of Kazakhstan and the western most reach of Mongolia. So it is a massive country. It occupies in a land area as much as all the rest, and probably more than all the rest of the Central Asian republics put together. It stretches from southern Russia to western China. If this was turned into a second Ukraine with a very aggressive anti-Russian, anti-Chinese government installed, it would be in a prime position to start to project a lot of mischief straight into the soft southern Siberian underbelly of Russia and directly into Xinjiang as well. So it could be reached by the US potentially from the Black Sea via Georgia, via Azerbaijan, and then across the Caspian and into Kazakhstan. The line does appear, although it would be a very vulnerable supply line indeed, all things considered. So it's not the easiest of supply lines. It potentially exists. There is a line of international space or friendly national space that the US and allies could use to insert itself into Kazakhstan and then to promote further problems into Russia and China itself. No question about that. The the protests themselves have elements of them which are textbook for the colour revolution. It was prompted primarily, the spark was this raising of fuel prices, but there does seem to be a well organised movement on the ground, which seemed to be coordinating, or has been coordinating things in the main focus of the city, which is the former capital, Astana, Alma Mater. Although on closer inspection, it doesn't seem quite so neat and quite so tidy. First of all, the main focus of the protests seemed to be against the former president of the Republic, Mr. Nazarbayev, who was a former Soviet Politburo member and who ruled Kazakhstan with effectively a cult of personality from independence in '91 until nominally retiring just a few years ago. And his successor, Mr. Tokayev, who was a close ally of him at that time, taking over the reins of power, but Mr. Nazarbayev himself still remaining head of security, retaining control of the main security forces of that country. He also was a Kazakh nationalist and seemed to encourage discrimination against the very large Russian population in there. We can't call them a minority. They might be technically a minority now, but they were for a long time a majority population. And by Russian, this would be people from all over the Russian state, not just European Rus in the West, but the Tatars, the Mongoloid, the Altai, Tongus, or whatever it, the whole full spectrum of ethnicities contained within the Russian Federation will have been represented in some shape or form as Russian citizens within what was then the Soviet Union borders, or the Russian Empire's borders within what is now Kazakhstan. So again, there does seem to be a degree of ethnic strife behind this as well, and one which a former president, who seems to be the target of much of the protesters at Aya, was largely responsible for generating. Nazarbayev himself was not a pro-Eurasian hardliner. He was one who liked to play both East and West against each other. He counted amongst his very good friends one Sir Anthony Blair, former Prime Minister of the UK. Another odd pairing, but as those that know Mr. Blair very well, Sir Anthony I should say, would know that this is by far an unusual or one-off event. He did keep some strange company for a human rights lawyer. But Mr. Nazarbayev was definitely one of them. So technically a potentially pro-Western leader, somebody who would not have been amiss to working with Western leaders to install Western interests in his country in order to use it to exert pressure and concessions, presumably, for energy, etc., against Russia. Not that Kazakhstan probably needs it. It is a very resource-rich country itself. No, there seems to be more to play in this, and it does look as though there is a large element of coup from effectively from the new president, Mr. Tokayev, to actually wrest full control from Mr. Nazarbayev in order to cement his own position in power. Is this the primary thing, or just a timely, yeah, action taking advantage of circumstances as they unfold? Very, very good question. That certainly has what's happened. Whether it was pre-planned or not is a very, very difficult thing to say. Mr. Nurbiev, as the head of security, had control of the main security forces, and one of the reasons why the riots of the last 4 or 5 days went on pretty much unchecked was that he did not allow the main security forces to become involved. So in Alma Mater, most of the resistance to the rioters was put up simply by the city police force, who seemed to have suffered very, very heavily as a consequence, because it appears that some of these rioters were quite well armed, and so they have taken casualties. This has now changed, and Mr. Tokayev has removed Mr. Nazarbayev from power altogether. He has taken control of all the security forces, and the full panoply of security forces, military, interior, police, etc., have now been deployed onto the streets, and it seems to have turned the tide of events quite sharply. And it seems that a large number of casualties overnight, and with a view to things now quietening down, it's been stomped on, and presumably in a few days will all be over. In addition, the CTSO, mainly led by Russian forces, have deployed troops into other parts of the country as well. We don't know where exactly or what they're doing. It might simply be that they are there to protect critical infrastructure and border crossings, etc., basically freeing up Kazakhstan's own forces to deal with the active part, and to prevent anybody else maybe trying to do anything sneaky on the side coming in across the borders, etc. There is also a small chance that there may be an Islamist element to this as well. Comes back to the basic question, is this a colour revolution? Well, it doesn't seem to be playing out quite like a colour revolution, and I think the biggest question that mitigates against it is the total lack of coordination from Western capitals and Western mainstream media. And a hallmark of a colour revolution is that all capitals and media outlets are primed, ready, and come out with the same narrative in unison, wall to wall, mass conformity, giving out the same message, the same narrative. Well, this hasn't happened. Everybody seems to be totally confused. There is total disarray, really, in how to report it, and many of them simply underplaying it and almost ignoring it. It's not a major news item. If it makes the broadcast news, it's a relatively minor event. When it's a real colour revolution, it's headline stuff, and this isn't it. And nobody really knows what's going on. Everybody's saying, "Oh, we just don't know what's happening," which is not what you would expect in a colour revolution. Whether they know what's happening or not, they've got a playbook, they've got a script, they've got a narrative. They would read it, irrespective, and that's all that would matter. There is not one here. Now, again, let's go back and quickly recap. Obviously, Kazakhstan is in a situation, it would be the jewel in the crown for colour revolutions in Central Asia. And just to remind everybody is that we had, until recently, an active program to enact, to cause such colour revolutions throughout all of Central Asia. That started with the US invasion of Afghanistan in 2001. Um, I think what we have here is a misfire, and it may well have been a deliberately primed misfire. Um, those elements were there. I dare say that Russian intelligence certainly would have known about them. Certainly with Russia's talks coming up with the US on the subject of non-interference in post-Soviet space, to suddenly get this at this very time as we're leading up is a bit of a coincidence. The fact that the winner on this has been the incumbent to remove a more pro-Western member of the government in the form of Nazarbayev, I think is not a coincidence. So maybe there was a spark, maybe it was done deliberately, maybe it was simply taking advantage of an opportunity that presented itself. Whatever it is, certainly elements that have been built up and primed and now despairing as they see the US exit Afghanistan earlier this year, wondering what are we for, what are we doing, what have we been spent all these years preparing for. Suddenly something sparks, they see people on the street and they think, well, now it's now or never. But they're going out without the support, without the narrative, without the concerted background action that they would need to be able to have a chance. And instead, they've simply managed to propel a useful, a local magnate, a local politician that would have been of use, a major political big beast that would have been of use to the West, into the wilderness, and a staunch supporter of the Eurasian project in the shape of Mr. Tokayev to take full control and stamp out these protests very, very quickly. And rather than be a weakness to the argument of Mr. Putin when he gets to meet Mr. Biden later this month, it might actually be strengthen his hand, because he can say we have a smoking gun of what was intended to be US malfeasance in the post-Soviet space. Well, we shall see as we go, but I suspect that this is it, that this is not a actual colour revolution, although it may well involve elements which have been trained and primed and set up for the purposes of colour revolution by the West over the last 2 decades, but that the whole thing has been a misfire and maybe even a false flag from the authorities in order to smoke these people out. What is it that the Roman Emperor said? Let the evil that lurk in the mud hatch out. So yeah, that would make a lot of sense. Putin taking time to weed out a potential weakness in his southern flank prior to sitting down and talking Turkey with President Biden of the United States. Does also lead into the talk that I've been meaning to have for some time now about governance and resilience in the Chinese economic system, and which I promise I will come back to at some time. Anyway, that is enough on this subject for this video today. I hope you found it informative. If you do, please press like. If you haven't signed up, subscribed to the channel yet, please do. It's free and it helps the channel to grow. If you would like other people to hear what I have to say, please share. And if you would like to leave a comment or ask a question on any end of the talk or the channel in general, please do so. I will respond and reply as appropriate. Until then, thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you will join me on my next video.